Welcome back, everybody, to Ravenstar's Witching Hour. I'm your host, Solaris Blue Raven. I'm here with my special guest, Keith McCloskey, and we're discussing Mountain of the Dead, the Dyat-lov Pass incident. And Keith, I think we kind of got cut off there a little bit into a break, but if you can kind of recap what you were discussing before we went to the break.
Yeah, sure, yeah. I was just saying about the going back over the cover-up issue or inconsistencies in the case. There was a guy I was hoping to meet when I was there. He was very ill at the time and unfortunately died while I was there. He was too ill to see me. But his name was Vladimir Korotayev. He was quite dismissive of the way the whole thing was handled. There was a taped interview which I saw of him in which he was saying that he was an investigator. He was one of the investigators, not a senior one. Basically, he was putting all the documents together. But as he was putting the whole case together, he noticed a lot of inconsistencies. And when he mentioned it to his superiors, he was told to shut up and get on with his work, and that wasn't his concern. He said the whole thing basically stank to high heaven. The whole official case. There's been other inconsistencies in the case that other people connected with it have mentioned over the years. But I know your listeners will probably think, well, why would they want to cover this up? 9 people died, albeit a terrible death. But you've got to go back to the nature of the Soviet Union again. It's a place where bad news really was never welcome. I mean, bad news isn't welcome anywhere, but it was never welcome there at all. There were people lost their jobs through it. And possibly the one thing why the authorities did take such a keen interest in this, other than a possible military accident or an energy weapon being tested and they wanted to divert attention away from it, is that the trip itself was in honor of the the Communist Party Congress in Moscow, which was being held at that time. I know, say, an American listener might think, well, why the hell would you dedicate your trip to? It'd be like, the Republican Party convention or the Democrat convention, some sports team dedicating their next game to the Democratic Convention. Well, why would you do it? But that's how it was. That's how it was in the Soviet Union. The Communist Party was everything, and there couldn't be enough praise or whatever. So it's possible that there was a lot of embarrassment that people were saying, look, these people have died. There was a delay in getting search parties out. It's terrible. They're all good young communists. They were all highly intelligent people. They were doing advanced degrees at the university in quite difficult subjects, and basically they've just been left up on the mountain. So there was probably a big push towards that, plus the embarrassment of the deaths themselves, that if the military had been involved, it doesn't say much to the rest of the population. Here's these young people giving their all in honor of the people who rule us, and basically the people who rule us have killed them in an accident. It's quite possible because there's a lot of inconsistencies in the search itself, because they were civilian skiers, they weren't military, and yet people had seen not one but 2 Soviet generals in Ivdel connected with the search. So why would a Soviet general at the height of the Cold War be in a provincial backwater, helping coordinate a search for 9 civilian skiers?
Right. And also, wasn't the search party, what was the delay with the search party in general? Why did it take them so long?
Again, that's part of the mystery, because it seemed as if they were reluctant to do it. They seemed to be dragging their heels over it. It was only when the relatives started complaining to the Communist Party bosses in Sverdlovsk to say, look, no, they're overdue. Nobody's doing anything about this. What the hell's going on? And there's a line of thinking that this was giving the authorities time to come up with a plausible description of what happened. The idea, one line of thinking is that they died somewhere else and that they were all brought to that location, which would explain why they were on Kholat Syakhl when they weren't meant to be there in the first place. It could be that they died in a blast or a directed energy weapon a couple of miles away, and they said, well, let's get them away from here in case people start digging around here later on. Let's get them away from the scene of the accident, and we won't put them on Mount Ot-orten. We'll stick them on a mountain nearby and just plonk them. Made the actual scene there. This was Gennady Kisenov's theory, was that they died in some kind of military accident, and that the scene setters, as he called them, had put the tent on Kholat Syakhl and the bodies as if they'd run away to try and just make the whole scene look as weird as possible. And it's possible. It is. It's a line of thinking that is possible. One of the inconsistencies on the actual site of the tent itself, it had been lying there supposedly for 3 weeks after they died and after they slashed their way out. So it was partially covered with snow. But a Chinese-made flashlight was found on top of the tent, but it hadn't been covered with snow, which implied that the scene had been set and somebody had just chucked a flashlight down on top of it to make it look as if it had been left behind. But if it had been there for 3 weeks, you would have expected it to be covered with snow, which it wasn't.
Right. Yeah, they had plenty of time to set the stage, didn't they? With that kind of a delay.
Well, that's the thing. Again, you can go quite deeply into this. There was a theory. Yuri Yudin went back to the university. He didn't stay there because it was the holidays, and he went to stay with his parents. But he did hear that there were rumors that the group were trying to escape from the Soviet Union. Now, this was before the party had been discovered, in inverted commas, that they knew they were dead. A rumor had been put out by somebody within the university itself that they were trying to escape to the West. He was enraged about it because they were good friends of his, and he said they would never have done that. And he said he felt as if it was the university, not just the university, but obviously people behind them in the authorities saying, look, we think these people are trying to run away to the West. And as if it was like a red herring. But it gave them time. It bought them time to think about what they were going to do with the dead bodies. If you follow the line, the unofficial line, that somebody was responsible, they died, and that this is a completely artificial scene, which is possible.
Wow, it sounds that way, and some weird, just very bizarre. I was going to ask you, insofar as their deaths go, how long would they have lasted in an environment such as that?
Only a few hours. I barely that, because I acted as a consultant to the Discovery Channel, to the TV company that's been commissioned to make a docudrama of it, and was filmed in Lithuania to be shown in February or March. And I was there with an expert mountaineer, a Lithuanian guy, really knowledgeable. And when he looked at the whole thing, he was saying, his first thing was, why did they camp up there? He said, if you're an experienced mountaineer, orienteer, whatever, you wouldn't have gone there for the night. You'd have, with a snowstorm, -26, you'd have looked for shelter down in the trees. And he said, and the other thing is, if you ran out into that environment with hardly anything on, they just had jumpers, and a lot of them didn't have any footwear. He said you wouldn't survive at the very most more than a few hours, if that.
Yeah,
and the thing is, if it is true that they ran away from it for whatever reason, there was a last-ditch attempt by 3 of them to get back to the tent. The ones that died on the mountain, they were the most well-dressed, so they'd probably taken the clothes from the others to try and make it back and get some more clothing for everybody, but they just didn't make it. And what they'd found with Zina, who was the one who was nearest, when you're dying, apparently your body goes into a kind of a final survival mode from which nobody ever recovers from. It's called terminal burrowing, where your body is trying to dig without you even thinking about it. And it looked as if that's what she'd been trying to do, to try and just gain some last bits of warmth. But your body's actually dying at that point. But it looked as if she was just, her body had given up. and it was a kind of an automatic reflex behavior just to burrow, just to try and get warmth.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And I know there is mention of a chief investigator who actually thought, or do you actually say it was UFOs or possibility of UFOs?
He was convinced to his dying day
Hmm.
that it was UFOs were responsible. They had seen marks on the cedar trees down at the baseline that excuse me, that looked like circular burn marks, not with a center, but small circles which looked as if they'd burnt the bases of the trees, which looked like a kind of a laser or an energy weapon.
Hmm.
And to his dying day, he was convinced that it tied in with the observance of the light orbs, because he questioned people in the area as well, the Mansi. He originally thought when he arrived on the scene that the Mansi were responsible,
Mm-hmm.
but people quickly discounted that because they led pretty hard lives, the Mansi. And if it had been, say, a couple of renegade Mansi, two members or three members of the tribe that had killed them or more, they would have taken anything of use, because they were herders and they didn't live very easy lives. So there was lights there, knives, axes, things they could have used.
Right.
But all of that was left behind. And he ruled them out pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, you can take another view with Levy Varnov. After he retired, he was a senior policeman. He had a pension. He had a accommodation provided by the state. So if the state said to you, we want you to say that you think this was a UFO, then you'd say it was a UFO. Otherwise, you're going to lose your pension and your house.
Right.
So, well, I know I would. Somebody said to me, well, Keith, we're going to take this flat away from you and this nice pension we're paying with you if you don't play ball with us. I'd go along with it.
That's the name of the game, isn't it? And I would like to open the phone lines up for you guys if you want to call in. Number is 347-688-290. Wait a minute, is that right? Gosh, I haven't even. It's been so long. Did I get that number right? I think it is. Hang on for a minute, you guys. I'm like, go ahead and call in if you like. Yeah, I think that's it. 347-688-2902 or Freedom Screen on Skype. Feel free to send us a text if you're interested in asking a question. And also, let's real quick, where can we get your books? Amazon.com, right?
Yeah, Amazon's probably the best, or
okay.
As they say, any reliable bookseller.
Okay, awesome.
I'll be very grateful if people are interested, and I hope you enjoy it.
Oh my goodness, it's fascinating, it's intriguing, and the more I think about it, the more it spins my wheels in so many different directions. Although I tend to lean towards the directed energy weapon for sure, just because of the way it's played out. And also, it just seems like there's a lot of foul play. I mean, it seems to me like they set the stage for so many different things, so it's just...
Well, I'm hoping to do a follow-up book to it.
You are, good.
So I'll be going back
Excellent.
to follow a couple of the theories, including the directed energy angle.
Is there anything you want to elaborate on right now with that, or?
Not really, because
okay.
I need to speak to people when I'm over there. I'm hoping to visit where Yuri Yakimov saw the lights as well.
Nice. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. That's really interesting. And when are they making the movie? Are they in process of making that now?
Oh no, there is a movie by Rennie Harlin, which I think it's been released in the States back in October, I think, but it went straight to DVD here. I mean, if people want to see it, I didn't think I quite like his films, but I don't think he did a good job with it. But some people like it. But I won't spoil the plot for anybody. But he has a theory of what happened to them at the end.
Is it a little too Hollywood?
Yeah.
Figures. Well, it usually is.
Think Philadelphia Experiment.
Oh, brother. No. All right. Well, that's all I need to know. I'm really intrigued about this, the way they lost their bearing insofar as the direction they were going and why they wound up on that mountain. I don't know if you can really elaborate any more than you have on that, but I just found it interesting. Do you think the leader was part of the deception plan in any case? Or?
Well, again, that's another one of the theories, Solaris. There is a theory that Zolotarev, Igor Dyat-lov, and I think it was Krivonashenko or Kolovatov were all KGB agents. It's possible, but why would it's just inconceivable that they should end up where they did. they were Igor Dyat-lov was very, very experienced in what he did. In fact, he had been asked to take on the job of what he was doing full time because this was basically a hobby for them. And coming back from this expedition, he was going to take it on as a full-time instructor, even though he was at the university. But it doesn't seem right that he should do it. Furthermore, if there was some kind of deception or whatever, it went very badly for all of them.
Yep, certainly did. And we have a question in the chat from, I guess, Sindaloo. Solaris, could you and your guest expand on that directed energy weapon theory?
Well, certainly, one of the theories, which we didn't touch on, was that it was an infrasound weapon. And there was a guy called Vladimir Gavreau, which is in the book. You see, people think that infrasound was responsible, but what infrasound does is, and you can direct it as a kind of an energy weapon, but it doesn't create broken bones. What it does, it induces nausea, queasiness, it can rupture blood vessels, it attacks all the soft tissue in your body, but it wouldn't explain Zolotarev and Dubinina, Luda Dubinina, their horrific broken bone injuries. But, the other thing about that type of weapon is that I've spoken to some experts in the field of infrasound, and even now, to make a weapon of that size would need to be about the size of a 40-foot container, a shipping container. It would be massive. It would have the footprint of a 40-foot shipping container. And it would have been more so in those days, in the early days, in the 1950s. This Gavreau was actually Russian, but he lived in France. And the theory is that he'd been involved in some type of research in this. But to get it up into the mountains, you need to take it on a tracked vehicle or a helicopter, which isn't impossible, but it's unlikely. But it's possible that there might have been a directed energy weapon of a kind of a laser, which would explain these burn marks on the cedar trees that were seen by Lev Ivanov. He was convinced. So it looks, the lasers can be quite large, but you see, we're going back to the 1950s when all this type of thing was in its relative infancy. But it's possible that some type of laser weapon could have been hand carried and directed at them.
Right.
Also, I was just going to say, it would also explain why it was on the trees, because whoever was directing it at them may have been doing it from a distance. They ran away from the tent down to the tree line with the weapon being fired at them, which would explain why the marks were on the tree trunks.
Right. And what about being deployed from the sky? That would, for a higher orbit, they couldn't do that.
That's a possibility. It could have been done from a helicopter, even.
Yeah, that's what it almost kind of seems that way to me. I don't know. I mean, I'd have to look at the trees and see how,
Well, it could be done from a helicopter because, you see, that would explain the lack of any other footprints around about. Although there is the talk that everybody obliterated the scene, but if there'd been masses of footprints, if there'd been a large party there of some kind, be it otherworldly people or military, you would expect masses of footprints everywhere or signs of them, but a helicopter would remove all that.
Yeah, it certainly would. That's very interesting. And insofar as the group diary goes, was there any indications in the diary that something was wrong or there's something off during their trip?
Well, again, the diary is a bone of contention. The chairman of the foundation, Yuri Kontsevich, who I correspond with regularly, was telling me that the diary, nobody knows where it is now, but it was common. People who had seen it said that there had been changes to it and parts of it had been rubbed out. So It looks that maybe something had been happening, but during the investigation, they were looking through it, whoever was, probably Lev Ivanov, and parts of it were changed.
Yeah, it sounds like there was a lot of editing.
Well, yeah, exactly. The thing is, if you look at the diary isn't there to look at, but what we've seen of it that's in the official files, what they say was in the diary. There's nothing contentious. They just talk about, the weather and what the trip is like. It's all very general.
Mm-hmm. That's really, really interesting. I don't know if this is another question or not from Sindaloo. It sounds like possibly new tech being tested and victims blamed on weather and generic mishaps. Does that make any sense to you?
It is, yeah, it does, yeah, because that is one of the main theories, is that some type of weapon was being tested, and this dreadful accident happened, and then the cover-up comes after it. That's a definite possibility. Mm-hmm. It probably, if that's the case, it probably happened while they were en route, and that their bodies were removed from there. I just suppose if somebody commits a murder, they think, well, maybe you can't get rid of the evidence for whatever reason. They obviously couldn't make all of them disappear because that'd be too strange. But they just say, well, let's make it look like an accident. And we don't want to do it where it happened because somebody might find something, whether it's a tracked vehicle or whatever, or evidence of military troops having been there. Let's take it right away from here and do it somewhere else. And the thing is, there is testing in it says that there isn't any testing in that area, or the view of the authorities. Mm-hmm. But Yuri Kontsevich goes up there regularly, and he's found evidence nearby of military testing. There's pieces of metal and what looks like sections of radar on a mountain there.
What year was that they were?
Oh, he said just recently. I've got pictures. He sent me pictures of them.
Oh, that's interesting.
Quite large pieces as well. Bits of military boots and all sorts of things.
Well, that plot thickens, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like they've been doing a lot more than what they say they are. Well, that's really interesting. I keep looking at the military background of that one. He was the leader, right, with the military background?
No. There's a lot of mystery about Zolotarev. He was a lot older. He was his actual birthday was the day they died.
Wow.
But he was 37 years old. The rest of them were all between 20 to 25. And he's an oddity because he wasn't a student at the university in Sverdlovsk. He was the mystery about him is that A, he was a lot older, and B, why was he there with them anyway? Because this was a student trip. Excuse me. The line of thinking with him is well, apart from the fact some people think he was a KGB agent, but there's another line of thinking that he worked as an instructor himself in the Altai Mountains. He was in Sverdlovsk. He was looking to get onto another ski tourist trip just to gain experience, and he attached himself to this group. One of the girls in the group was very attractive, Zina, and she was the center of male attention from all of them, really. She was going out with she was romantically linked with Igor Dyat-lov, and she'd previously been going out with somebody else who had been in the group, and it was said that Zolotarev was quite sweet on her as well, and that's why he joined the group. So it's a possibility, but and that's one of the theories that a fight broke out between all of them over her, which and spilled out and then went down the mountain. Possible, but nobody knows. But he had fought in the Second World War, and he had close combat decorations, and he was a bit of an oddity as a character. He also had tattoos. At the autopsy, it was found that he had tattoos, and tattoos in Russia have a lot of significance in the criminal underworld. They always have. It gives you status. Yuri Yudin said that it was a lot of nonsense that was talked about Zolotarev being mysterious and all the rest of it, but he is mysterious, and Yuri Yudin didn't really know him that well. Zolotarev got on well with him. He liked to sing along with them, and they all apparently took to him. So it's almost as if he'd ingratiated himself into the group, but nobody really knew why he was there.
Right. Well, it certainly sounds like he was somebody there to participate with this. Almost sounds like a training exercise. I hate to say it, but
well, yeah, it does. And the other thing about Zolotarev, all the bodies are buried in one cemetery in Ekaterinburg, except for two people, Krivonyshenko and Zolotarev. They're buried in a separate cemetery, which was supposed to be for high-ranking or people with connections. It was, I don't know, the Park Lane of cemeteries at the time, you could say, maybe. But, you know, I've been to both cemeteries to see the graves, and a lot of people are saying it's very odd that those two should have been buried away from the rest of them, because there's a large memorial with the main group. It seems strange that they should have been buried apart. But Zolotarev, Krivonyshenko, his parents wanted him buried in this other cemetery, and they paid to have Zolotarev buried there as well, because apparently nobody turned up to his funeral from his family's side.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah. So there is. Sorry, I was just going to say about that cemetery. It's meant to be for KGB and high-ranking people, and they're wondering why Zolotarev was put in there. You know, which lends support to the theory it was something to do with the KGB.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I would say so. Well, that kind of solves that mystery on some different level. But there's another question here. I think that's from Jerry B. here. It's why would anyone want to remove one of the hiker's tongues? And that's a good question.
Nobody knows. I mean, honestly, it's if you want to focus on one thing in the whole story, it's that. It doesn't. The autopsy didn't say that the tongue had been cut out. It said her tongue was missing, but there was blood found in her stomach, which, as I said earlier, she swallowed the blood. So it looks as if the tongue had been torn out or cut out, because obviously there'd be massive quantities of blood. There was blood found in her mouth as well. But for it to go into your stomach means you'd have had to swallow it. So you'd have had to have been alive for that to happen. And Yuri, like I said, she was the most outspoken member of the group. Could it be that they were being interrogated by a group, or something had happened? They'd run up against people who did, you know, maybe there was secret weapon testing, and they just wanted to get rid of them, and that she didn't care too much for it, and said exactly what she thought. So maybe somebody wanted to teach her a lesson. And it was Yuri Yudin himself who said it's ironic that the person who lost their tongue was the one who probably would use it the most.
Yeah, highly suspicious. And I'm wondering, would a directed energy weapon take the tongue out like that? Or?
Well, that's Yuri Yakimov's theory, is that the directed energy weapon, after they'd seen the lights, hit two of them in the chest, which would account for because they were in a straight line with the breaks on both of them, and as Luda was hit, because her ribs were broken, as she was hit, and her head probably fell back, and the weapon then went further up and then hit her on the side of the exposed jawline and hit her underneath that, forcing her tongue to be torn off. It's because the force of it would go through the body.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking if she was screaming or something too, maybe it would have been something where the laser would have just taken it out immediately. I don't know.
Well, her mouth would have been open probably, because if the ribs had been broken first by the weapon, she probably would have been screaming in agony. I mean, it's very painful. I mean, I've had sore ribs before, and it's to have them all broken immediately. I would think you would be in extreme agony.
Right.
So,
yeah, it's quite tragic. Actually, it's very sad, and it's very, very mysterious. But at the same time, boy, it just smells like military covert technology and a lot of.
It does. Yeah. I mean, well, that's the trouble. There's something bad happened. You know, there's other people who. I mean, I had one person say to me, I asked him to translate it. He said, "Well, this is a non-story." I said, "Well, how do you mean that?" And he said, "Well, they all ran out of the tent, froze to death, and the ones that had the horrific injuries fell into a ravine." And, you know, well, okay, that's possible. Why did they run out of the tent in the first place? And would people all fall into a ravine in a straight line, or one after the other? You know, somebody would disappear from sight, and you think, well, Christ, I don't want to fall in there as well, or, you know, it doesn't make sense.
No, not at all. Something startled them enough to really panic and get out of that tent. I'm also
But
thinking radiation burns, no radiation burns or anything like that on their bodies.
no, there was no. The only burns were to the two found by the cedar tree, and
Hmm.
that's from where they'd been sticking their hands into the, and their feet into the flames because they're basically they were losing their limbs, and it was to
Right.
try and get the circulation going again. But I think by that point the limbs were too far gone anyway.
Hmm.
Had they lived, they'd probably had to have had them amputated.
Right. And well, they had time to do that, which tells me that maybe they weren't being attacked nonstop.
Yeah, well, that's very true. It could be that the attack happened at the tent. That was the line of Yuri Akimov's theory that the attack happened at the tent. They all got down to the tree line. Possibly the weapon was fired at them there, which would account for the burn marks on the trees, but they got away from it,
Hmm.
and they were just waiting for their chance to go back, which again would have accounted for the injuries. There is talk that there weren't any signs of people being dragged along. Like if Luda and Zolotarev had got broken ribs and somebody else had a fractured skull, that
Hmm.
they would be needing help to get down the mountain, and the tracks didn't indicate this. But then, there's other people that say, well, the tracks are all obliterated. The tracks fizzled out after 500 meters because the tree line was over a mile away
Hmm. And
from the tent.
how big or how tall is this mountain?
It's
This elevation?
just over 1,000 meters high.
Okay. Yeah.
And again, and it's very gentle. It's not like one of some of these steep side of things you see where you're literally climbing. You can walk up it
Hmm. Right. And the snow was how deep?
a meter deep.
Okay. Yeah.
So and there would have been biting winds as well, which would reduce the temperature even further. I mean, the moment they got out of the tent, uh, although I suppose the adrenaline would have been rushing,
Hmm.
but you would have felt that immediately. So some of them were just wearing socks. The cold would start attacking you
Hmm.
literally after you'd gone just a few feet.
Right. Yeah. Was there ever any mention of this indigenous tribe witnessing anything that night? Anything suspicious or?
Well, other than the light orbs,
Hmm.
nothing really. They'd met them on the journey and spoken to some of them. Igor Dyat-lov had spoken to some of them. They're always there. The Mansi, they're still up there now. I mean,
Hmm.
they're not very. I think it was only 7 or 12,000
Hmm.
of them altogether, but they're around the whole area. That's a huge area, that
Right.
northern Urals. But I don't think they got involved in the search.
Hmm.
And a Mansi family had said that they had seen a search party on Mount Ot-orten that couldn't be accounted for by. There were several search parties sent out, but they were all in specific areas. But there was one group of people who was assumed to be a search party that was assumed by the Mansi to be KGB
Hmm.
people involved in it. But they would run their own show.
Wow, that's really interesting. Well, you would think that tribe would know a little bit more than what they're really communicating. If they live there, they certainly must see or witness some anomalies besides the orbs.
Well, yeah, it's true. But again, in Soviet times, if you said you knew a lot of things, or I think this happened, I've read a lot of Russian literature. I've talked to a lot of Russians from that time, and it's a place where you kept your mouth shut. Is the impression I get. Why
Hmm.
bring yourself to the attention of the authorities?
Right.
Especially in something like this, it's possible they did see something, but obviously there was a lot of trouble there. You look at it, you're herding your reindeer, you have a bottle of vodka at the weekend, and you're having a good time, and suddenly 9 people die, and the place is swarming with military and generals, KGB,
Hmm.
people you don't really want to get involved with or associated with. You
Right.
help as much as you can, but you don't want trouble. That would certainly be my take in on it, anyway.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And I guess are things smoothing out there? I mean, are they getting out of that pattern, or what do you think? What is your
Well,
impression?
I don't know how much I can say about this, but Yuri Kuntsevich runs the Dyat-lov Foundation, and he got copies of the actual official report after the thaw, if you like, after the fall of the Soviet Union. But the KGB is now the FSB. And when I first went there, in my rather naivety, I said to my translator, well, why don't we approach them and just see if they'll talk to us? And she just laughed and said, you've got to be joking. She said, they're not the people that, you approach. Anyway, on the day we were going to the cemetery where Zolotarev and Krivonashenko were buried, we actually passed the FSB headquarters, and there was a few of them outside and guards, and she pointed them out to me and she said, look at them. She said, can you imagine any of them inviting you in for a cup of tea and a chat? She said they might do, but it wouldn't be a chat you'd want to have. But they look pretty unfriendly people. And that was confirmed to me because when I was there, Yuri Kuntsevich had written them a letter earlier on this year and said that he had files on it. Because I do not believe that they don't have some input on it or files. They tend to get involved in every aspect of Soviet life if there was anything untoward. And he'd sent them a letter saying, would you like to exchange files? And they sent him a letter back, which was translated to me. And it said, as you know, this case was concluded in May 1959 and the conclusion was reached. And it said a bit of other blurb. And then at the end of it, it said, we don't expect to hear from you again. In other words, don't call us. Yeah, it was quite an abrupt and unpleasant, unfriendly letter. It was really, don't bother us and get lost, basically. So the place is very much like, it seems to be getting a lot more it was always an authoritarian place. And you might think, well, in the States, if something like this had happened, there'd be so much media interest and external, people would be saying, what the hell's going on here? Let's get this investigated and find out who's responsible. It's not like that over there. Like I said about the anthrax outbreak, everybody knows what happened, but you wouldn't say it. And you might think, well, it's a society that's really being cowed by the authorities, but I find they're very patriotic people. There's a line of thinking of, well, even say ordinary people you talk to there, of why do you want to dig all this up? If it was an accident, it was an accident, and if it was the military that did it, they didn't mean to do it, which they probably didn't. It was just an accident they wanted to get rid of, but it would show them in a bad light. But their view is that if you're digging, it's like, I don't know, dropping a cup on the floor and it smashes. You wouldn't expect to be beaten up for it. You'd just say, well, it's an accident, you're a bit clumsy or whatever. But their view is if you want to go digging into these things, you're attacking, the authorities, you're attacking the military who are only trying to do a difficult job and protect us from our capitalist foes. So, so there is quite a strong element of that.
Right. And there's a question from Jerry B. here. It says, were one or more members of the group actively protesting against the government or military actions?
Well, there's no evidence of it.
Okay.
I haven't, certainly, and anybody I spoke to, Yuri Yudin never mentioned it. I mean, in 1959 in the Soviet Union, anybody who was protesting against the authorities wouldn't be at university. They'd more than likely be locked up in one of the gulags.
Right.
It was just a place where you didn't openly. There was a Frenchman, a French communist, that was one of the group, Nikolai, his name was. I'm not that good on French pronunciation, but Thibaut Brignol, it was a double-barreled name. His father he left France to go and live in the Soviet Union, and he had quite a good position in the Urals area, and he was locked up in the purges and executed eventually. But his son Nikolai was born in the gulags, but he'd been rehabilitated, if you like, even though he was the son of a supposed criminal. He had a lot of access to literature, apparently, that others couldn't get hold of. But again, if the authorities knew of things like that, you'd be investigated.
Right. That's very interesting. So I know their injuries were caused by, quote, I like the quote of an unknown elemental force. So would you like to elaborate on that description?
Well, it could be that the doctor who performed the autopsy was just at a complete loss with the whole thing. How do you explain? Because performing an autopsy, you're also supposed to give some indication of how you think the injuries happened. And you've got people there who looked as if they'd been in a car crash, but there's obviously no cars up there, or weapons. He couldn't have said too much. I mean, obviously, the doctor isn't a stupid man, education-wise, but he could have well thought to himself, well, this looks like some kind of military accident. I don't see how else it could have happened. The whole thing is just so bizarre. But it could, I do think that he was probably told to come up with a conclusion that left the whole thing open-ended, which is what he did, and to say an unknown elemental force or an unknown compelling force, which some people have translated it as. It just leaves it nice. Now it's almost like an act of God.
Right. Yeah. And
You know,
it's still,
how do you
yeah.
explain an act of God?
Well, it still doesn't explain the orbs too. And I find, are the orbs still being seen over there? Or is that something that's consistent?
No, they haven't been seen for a long time, but they were regularly seen about that time by a lot of people. You know, it's the thing is, for something like that, there was an air base, as I say, less than 100 miles away, and although aircraft were becoming more sophisticated and radar, it was all still at a very early stage. You would think that things like that, particularly as they were worried about an attack from the USA over the polar ice cap, which the space was meant to help defend, that they would have investigated something like that.
Right.
But there doesn't seem to be. I mean, the trouble is, again, you're coming back to the Soviet Union. It could be that they have been investigated, but the results are hidden, locked up somewhere.
Yeah, classified on their end.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. We have Bella asked another question here. Could they have been trespassing on black ops or UFO inner Earth entrance? That's a question.
Well, that is, that's one of the theories that they, especially as they were on that mountain where they weren't meant to be. It could have been black ops. I mean, the USA was very interested in what was going on. You know, we had those places with nuclear warheads and all the rest of it. And at that point, the U-2 flights had only just got going. I mean, all right, they've been going for a couple of years, but they couldn't cover everything. They didn't have enough information of what was going on. And it could have been black ops because there was a thing called the bomber gap, although there weren't any bomber airfields in the area. And one of the things was to deploy special operations teams into Russia to look at the bomber airfields. And obviously, U.S. troops, I'm not saying that they're the bad guys in this, but if they'd run into people who knew they're obviously not Russians, they'd want to eliminate them. It could be, one of the theories is it's Russian special forces testing a secret weapon. Again, that's a possibility. And, you know, the whole UFO thing, I don't rule that out. I mean, people say, oh, you're a nutcase or whatever, but I think you've got to keep a completely open mind.
Right.
You've got deaths that are unexplained. You've got orbs that were seen in the sky that nobody can explain. And it does seem a hell of a coincidence. And I believe that there could well be something there. And just because nothing's been proved so far doesn't mean to say that it hasn't happened.
Right. And isn't it notorious to see it seems like there are always UFO anomalies or orbs of some kind around military areas, military bases?
Well, I've been contacted by somebody who shall remain nameless because he worked on missiles on the missile bases over in the States. And he said that that was his theory, that you've got nuclear warhead storage areas, plutonium processing, you've got an air base nearby. There's a lot of military testing in the area. There's just north of Sverdlovsk as well is a road mobile nuclear missile base. The whole area is just like a giant armed camp. So if you've got UFOs coming in, they're going to look for where the threats are. You know, if people turn up or any extraterrestrials turn up, they're going to say, well, if we pitch up here, we might not be welcome, so let's look at what the threats are. I mean, if you see a wild animal let's say you're up there, you see a bear. The first thing the bear's going to do is look at you and see what sort of a threat you pose to him before he does anything. And the next thing that he'll probably do is decide if he's hungry whether you're going to be his next meal. If he's decided you're not a threat, and then it could be. I mean, it's just human nature. Okay, it may not be human or whatever, but you do look for where the threats are, and obviously the military is a threat.
Yeah, there's definitely a connection. It seems like they just kind of seesaw each other all the time.
It does, and it keeps. I find the thing with it, Solaris, it keeps coming back to it all the time. It seems to keep coming back to this whole thing, which is why one of the reasons why I want to go back to dig a bit more deeply into it, and I want to speak to the police when I go back as well and see what view they would have on it, because they're probably not as bad as the military from the point of view of wanting to keep things secret.
Right.
So I'm hoping that I'll be able to speak to them when I go back.
Yeah, that would be good. Do you think they'll be pretty open to you when you get back over there?
Well, again, it just depends how much. It's difficult because the Soviet Union is now gone, and your livelihood depended on the state. It's not like that now. Okay, these are still government jobs, but there are other things to do. So by talking to people, it's not as important if the government say, well, we don't really like you talking to them, and you can say, so what? And they'll say, well, you're out of a job, but there are other jobs now. There's a lot of privatization there. The state ruled everything previously and kept an iron grip on what people could say and whether they kept their livelihoods where they lived, basically. I mean, there were people who lost their livelihoods and jobs over the Dyat-love case.
Wow.
The head of the university lost his job over it, and it would have been booted out to somewhere in the far reaches of Siberia, as a kind of a punishment.
Wow, that's just amazing. Well, I can't believe we're almost ready to wrap this up. It's been an incredible evening, and I hope to have you back when you get more information. And also, we have a little bit of time here. If you want to just kind of talk a little bit about these 3 lighthouse keepers briefly, if you want to give everybody a preview of that.
Yeah, sure. I won't give too much away. Okay. Again, it's probably a bit more clear-cut in some ways, but I quite like mysteries. And I used to live up in Scotland at one time, and a friend of mine had a house out on an island called Lewis. Right, some of your listeners may know it, but it's a beautiful island. And 18 to 20 miles offshore is a small group of rocks, is all you could call them. But a lighthouse was built there in 1896. And in December 1900, the relief went out to relieve the 3 keepers there. And when they fired the rocket, they were expecting the men to come down, but nothing happened. So they landed a boat and went up to the actual station itself, and they just completely disappeared off the face of the earth, all 3 of them. And nobody's ever really been able to explain it. The lighthouse itself is 300 feet above sea level, so there's all sorts of theories about what happened to them. There's a supernatural element to it because the island, there was a chapel on it, and monks used to pray out there, and it was believed that the dead were taken out there to be put into funeral pyres up in the sky to be, to be cremated, if you like, or burned. So there's a heavy religious and supernatural element to the island. One of the theories is that they disturbed the spirits of the island, and the 3 of them disappeared. It's one of the main theories is they were all swept away by a giant wave. But I've spoken to quite a few light keepers, because they're all automated, these stations now, and they just say, well, one man was always meant to stay in the lighthouse, so that if there was an accident, there was somebody there to operate the light. But the man who, all 3 of them disappeared. 2 of them had their outdoor gear on, but the 3rd one was just dressed in his ordinary clothes, and there was a gale blowing that day. Wow. So, yeah, it doesn't sound that, but it is quite an interesting one when you get into it.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody knows what's happened to them ever since.
Wow. So is that going to be a new book coming out then?
Yep, yeah. I've just sent the manuscript to the publisher. So,
Excellent.
and the Discovery Channel are also
Wonderful.
the TV company that's doing it for the Discovery are looking at making a documentary about it as well.
Oh,
So,
wonderful.
yeah.
Okay. Well, let us know what the title is so we can get it on
Yeah,
Amazon.
I'll send you the details.
Okay, that would be awesome. And like I said, I'm really, really pleased to have you on tonight, Keith.
Yeah,
It's
thank
been
you very much.
fabulous.
Yeah.
And hope to have you back. I do want to thank everybody at Revolution Radio, staff, chat room, producers, listeners, everybody. Great questions tonight. So thank you for sending in those questions. And also, stay tuned for Shiny Side Out with David Dunger and Mickey coming up next, of course, to sail you into the night. And of course, next week, my special guest will be Rob Sullivan. So make sure you stay tuned into that too. And we still have a few more minutes left here. But how can people get a hold of you if they'd like to contact you for anything?
Well, I have a website, KeithMcCloskey.com. So, and I've done a couple of radio interviews. If people want to discuss anything, if they can just go to my website, I'll send you the details. Solaris, do you have a site you can put it on?
Yes,
or?
I do.
Yeah, thanks. If you wouldn't mind doing that.
Oh,
But the thing is, I don't have a fixed idea about this. Nobody. You'll meet people who think we know what happened, but nobody knows what happened until it's proven. Nobody knows. I'm totally open to new ideas all the time. If anybody's got a theory, it doesn't matter how outlandish it is, send it in. And it might seem outlandish to some people, but it may be the answer. And the other thing is, a couple of people have said, well, there could be more than one answer.
Mm-hmm.
There could be a couple of elements that caused what happened to happen. Just very quickly, I'll give you an example. I was contracted by a professor at a university, and his theory was that they ate contaminated bread, ergot, which causes you to go crazy. And it's because they were eating, bread was their staple, one of their staple foods. That's a possibility. So if anybody would like to contact me, I had another gentleman send me a 110-page thesis on it on A4 paper, and He's made some very good points. He's made some very good. I don't agree with all of it, but he's come out with some good points, because he thinks the way the parties were split up is that they had all their wits about them, and the three were kind of the workers who were going to try and get back to the tent. Two were kind of a base to get a bigger fire going as they could, and that and the others were convalescing because they'd been injured. So it shows some thinking was going on there, and they were trying to organise things, and that hasn't been mentioned before, and that's a pretty good way to look at it as well. So, as I say, no matter what anybody thinks about how stupid their idea might sound to others, let's hear it.
Right.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, I agree. It gets people thinking for sure. I mean, I find it's one of those things where it just has so many layers to it and so many levels that once you start looking at it, that's why I'm glad you're going back, because I think you're going to find a lot more information.
Yeah, well, I think coming at it the first time, as I did, you're taking it all in, and there's so much to take in. But I feel there's certain things I can discard now, and I can look in other areas. There's certain roads I wouldn't go down, I don't think, when I go back, but there's other roads I do want to go down and write a different type of book. My idea with this book was, I've been criticised by a few people on Amazon to say, well, he doesn't say what happened, as if excuse me, as if they want me to give them the name and address of the person who killed them. Right. Well, I'm afraid I can't. My idea was, I should have explained it better in the book, these are all the main ideas. You decide. I wanted the reader to make their own minds up on it. I mean, I do say that I think it's a Soviet military accident, but I can't prove it. But I'm open to anything else. The directed energy one is a definite.
Oh yeah, I see that too, and I do think that the orbs tie in some weird way. I think there's definitely something connected with that. So
yeah. I mean, I'm in touch with somebody who runs a UFO group who specializing in that area, and I'm going to try and get a bit more on that in the book that I'm going to produce next.
Right.
And like I say, I want to visit go with Yuri Akimov and see where he saw those lights, and what I'd like to do is include pictures, more pictures this time of the areas where these things happen, because when you see a picture, I think you get a far better idea rather than just a description on the page. You know, you can say, well, it was a mile down to the tree line, but if you've got a picture of that journey, it's so much better.
Right, and actually visiting the place too, that's another thing too, is just to get over there and assess the area. And I don't know, I'm pretty sure there's some kind of an imprint left over there. I mean, I wouldn't imagine it would be kind of vacated now. I'm sure there's some kind of a signature there still.
Yeah, well, that's where Yuri Kontsevich goes up 2 or 3 times a year, every year. Yeah.
Wow. Does he get new information or?
Yeah, well, he doesn't speak any English, so, you know, I go through my translator. And of course, we've got Google Translate, but he's very open. He runs the foundation. Well, I don't know if your listeners know, but Yuri Yudin died back in April. He wasn't a very well man at all, but all his notes and photographs of the whole thing are with Yuri Kontsevich now in the Ekaterinburg. I mean, if anybody wants to visit, he'll be glad to put you up. He's, you know, obviously pay him for the food and the accommodation, but he's a good lad. But you'll need to brush up on your Russian.
Yeah, no kidding. I only know a few little things that would get me in trouble. So
yeah, I just know niet. I was told off.
Niet? Is that no?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know a few things. Not too much. Only enough to get me in trouble, like I said.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Well, we're running out of time here, but thank you so much, Keith, for being on tonight. And thank you, everybody else. And Keith, I hope to have you back real soon. Take care, everybody. I'll see you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Listening to Revolution Radio.